All right, welcome back, art family. Today I'm going into a little more detail about one of my recent favorite art hacks, which is art prompts, and I'm using artprompts.org to generate an idea so that I may warm up easier, not having to conjure an idea from thin air, but have something to work from as a basis. So I'm just going to refresh this one more time for a few more ideas. The next one we have is a fruit-eating dragon, so I'm going to drop that into Photoshop, and we're going to do it one more time because these are just going to be quick sketches. We're not going to go into a ton of detail and line work today. Trolls playing golf. I'm sorry, I just can't with golf. Nothing against it for anyone who enjoys it, but it is terribly unexciting to me, and don't want to get out of my comfort zone bad enough to play some trolls or to draw some trolls playing golf. So last one we got is a boar of war, so that's awesome. I feel more inspired about that. And you don't have to take every prompt you get, obviously. It's just something you can do in order to create a better foundation to start from. Like if I'm just drawing on a blank canvas with no ideas, then it feels sort of aimless. But if I have even just one idea, like King of Beasts, then I already can start to generate something based on these ideas. Like a king, there's like crowns, and I can already tell I'm gonna have to fix my tablet sensitivity here in a second. There's crowns, there's royalty. It's like a word association game. So beasts, you can think of like apes or lizards. It's just anything that gets your brain moving in different directions. So the king of beasts. It's just three words, but there are so many ways we can tackle this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sketching with some of these ideas in mind to just start to work on my fundamentals a little bit more today. So let's have something that is very volumetric, something that has a lot of volume. And I'm going to try and do that with just using mostly black and white and a little bit of line work. So the King of Beasts. Since I don't have my tablet sensitivity functioning currently as one of my Photoshop glitches that happens to me from time to time, I'm just going to roll with that. And I'm going to start with a big shape because it's a king. And usually think of a king in the Beast Kingdom as something that has risen due to its dominant sort of nature. So we're going to be looking up at it already, I can tell. And this is just from a few marks. And I know that when you're a beginner, this can seem really kind of scary and like, oh, how are you even getting here? What is the idea here? What is this anything? I see like clouds or something. This is just from doing it a lot. This is literally just mileage. It means you're going to have to go through a ton of drawings and some drawing courses or some life drawings, or there's just lots of ways to start to generate things that actually have some feeling for you. So I do want to give this guy a crown. I'm not going to lie. Like, I really like the idea of the King of Beasts having a crown. I know it's fairly obvious as far as like the prompt goes, but I think that it's something that I feel like drawing, so we're going to roll with that. And I'm going to sketch in what I can remember a crown to look like off the top of my head. Just something very ornate. Looks like it belongs on top of some sort of religious building or something. So there's the crown in all of its sketchy glory. I will clean this up a little bit because I know this is so vague that it's probably uninteresting to look at, but just rotate the canvas quick, refresh my navigator. It likes to get a little goofy. I'm starting to get an idea of like the king's bill. He's fairly thick and strong, but I don't quite know what kind of beast he is. I'm feeling humanoid at this point. Humanoid is definitely more of my comfort zone. I can add like a mane, like a giant mane, because it's very beastly. So I'm drawing some shapes that remind me of a mane. I'm sort of separating out some of these elements because this is sort of a goofy series of facial shapes here. And again, I'm going to be focusing mostly on black and white, just the separation of those elements for this drawing, which is also known as notan, N-O-T-A-N. I believe it's a Japanese term. And I'm actually seeing like these eyes bleeding out sideways, which there's only a couple creatures that do that, and one of them is a sloth. So I didn't have a perfectly clear idea when I started, obviously, but it was a jumping off point. And so now I'm going to make it a giant sloth because why not? So the King of Beasts is going to be a fierce sloth, and that means he's going to have some of those warrior marks about his face. Going to have like a strong, like jaw of sorts or mouth. I actually don't know what sloths look like off the top of my head very well, but I know that I can get the general idea across. And there's no shame in using reference. I'm just making a quick video, so I'm probably not going to. I just want something that appears very kingly. And one of my favorite things about sloths that I do know is accurate is they have some long, lanky arms. But if we add some thickness to those arms, they seem rather formidable. So then we have to figure out, well, what's the pose now? We have sort of this upward angle where if I were to put this guy in a cylinder, we'd be looking up at the cylinder, and this is the rough perspective gauge is sort of like this, and then we're seeing him upward based on the curvature of these lines. So that's what I'm sort of thinking in as I'm looking at this drawing. I'm not drawing it overtly, but you can if it helps you. I go into stuff like that in detail in my beginner drawing course. I'm working on the beginner drawing course 2 right now, which you can also pre-order. But the beginner drawing course 1 is really affordable at this point and still has a lot of validity in this respect. So I'm just starting to sketch in the body. I'm trying to figure out, how thick do I want him? Do I want to have like a little belly? Do I want him to be like ripped and have not a lot of body fat, or a mixture of fat and muscle? So I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about how much do I want to feature the pose, as far as is it dynamic? And I've drawn this before in many ways, but it's in my comfort zone when I'm warming up, so I'm not too concerned about breaking into new fundamental ground necessarily. I am concerned with subject matter, and that's really what prompts help with, is helping you define new subject matter to work with. Because I've drawn like beefy stuff before, and like I even drew like a really strong, hugely like braided barbarian woman for the last little demo I did on prompts. So this is going to be a gigantic, strong sloth being, just because I like to draw very strong beings from time to time. I just find it fascinating that things exist on this planet with a great deal of like physical prowess. So we're just going to roll with that. I'm obviously humanizing him quite a bit, just because, again, that's my comfort zone. I know the most about human anatomy. I don't know as much about animal anatomy, and even less about like mechanical anatomy. So I come at most things with the foundational knowledge that I've built. And that's something to kind of think about as you're working, or as you're working to improve, is what are areas that are of genuine interest to you, and where are you going to put those skill points? Like I said, I don't have a ton of knowledge in mechanical anatomy because I haven't drawn a lot of mechanical things. However, that could change if I wanted to take a deep interest in them. It just means that it's going to be some conscientious effort in that capacity. So at any rate, what I'm drawing here is just trying to figure out, okay, well, where am I going to place all these other elements, like his, claws, perhaps, like it's a three-toed sloth, or, what's going to make him seem the most interesting to look at from the point of like a sketchy drawing. And I'm trying to also suggest how he's going to fit within the canvas, which is not the easiest thing in the beginning. It's not the easiest thing even as you progress. So he sort of looks like he's walking. He's got some motion to him as the king of beasts. And I'm not mad at that. I'm really not, especially for a warm-up. And I'm just also like drawing on the form, making sure that I am in fact inferring enough volume here. And I'm making the cape kind of sway back. It's kind of a short, stubby cape to contrast his sort of big frame. Now I'm going to start thinking about where I can really add some dark black areas and shapes to really help this guy pop and to infer some more detail. It looks like my brush is starting to function more normally again. Again, just a Photoshop glitch I know how to deal with, but I'm going to turn the opacity off and just go to 100% so that I can not worry about that and only worry about creating solid shadow shapes. I talk about the separation of black and white values in my beginner drawing course 1, as well as my beginner painting course. It's one of the best ways to parse art, is to just break it down to black and white so that there's no in-between tones, because that way you'll be able just to focus on where are these shadows falling, if they are cast shadows, if they are form shadows, and if they're occlusion shadows. Again, I talk about all this at more length in the beginner drawing course, but the basic formula is that occlusion shadows are little tiny areas where absolutely no light is reaching. And so I'll just have the light source be kind of falling on him from the front here. And cast shadows are shadows where an object is getting in the way, for example, his big body, so there'd be a shadow. Not going to worry too much about this leg right here. There'd be a shadow that his body is casting based on the angle of the light, and I would go ahead and just lasso that whole area off and fill it in, because it's just one huge shadow shape that's being cast based on what is blocking the light. So there's that. Got some rough edges on it, but again, it's a sketch, so we're not going to be too picky. Then I'm going to drop it in a little bit of occlusion shadows between the toes there. There's also the base value of any given part or component. So for example, the claws could be black, and I'll leave like a little tiny bit of white to show like a highlight so that the claws seem like they're shiny. It's just knowing how to place these values in ways that feel like what it is you're trying to convey, whether it's a material or how the light is falling, all that good stuff. So we are primarily relying again on our lines and these heavy values to determine some form on this incredibly rough sketch, but it's a really good way to just get warmed up and to start thinking in these modalities, especially if you've been studying on them for a little bit as you're working through, say, the beginner drawing course or whatever course you're working on or whatever you're studying at the time. So I'm just going to continue to try and create some dimensional separation by adding weight to some of the lines or reducing the weight of certain lines. And I'm going to start to add and subtract some marks from various areas just to, again, help me separate things based on the base value or the types of shadows that are occurring. So in a nutshell, prompts are there to help kickstart ideas and give you places to apply the fundamentals if you have no idea in your head, like I want to draw a giant mech and I'm gonna use that to learn more about detail or mechanical anatomy or values or what have you. It's helpful to have some of these prompts already generated for you so that you can really just focus on having a technical understanding of what you're doing or application. And I'm just going in with some mark making, helping to further define the form. And it's starting to kind of come together. I don't draw like this very often, where I'm just almost treating it like a giant Sharpie or a series of just black and white aspects. So it's helpful to think about where the light is and isn't for me. Just think about what I can block off as far as large areas of value and simplification are concerned. So it's just nice on a couple different levels to use a prompt so that I can focus more on the technique rather than trying to come up with a cool idea, because that can really stop you sometimes. And what I want to get across with art prompts is that you should always have some sort of subject to draw from that helps you flex your idea muscle as well, not just your technical ones. So save this guy quick. Start to look at him from a couple different angles. Rotate the page. It makes me look at the shadow shapes differently. Makes me think of what I'm doing differently, think of the negative space. There's lots to consider in every single drawing. Of course, you can only consider so much at one time, which is why you have to kind of do some linear processing of what's going on and just think like, okay, how are the values looking? How are the overall shapes? How's the volume? How is the anatomy and the proportion? Asking yourself these things and then checking for different ways of looking at something so that you can suss out what you're enjoying and maybe what doesn't work from certain angles, because strong stuff works from multiple angles and even if you're flipping the canvas. So it's just a good place to start. Now using texture to help me get a little more form. All right, so I'm going to kind of tip him up just a little bit. So now we have this slothy king of beasts, which I can see how much I can get away with as far as adding this dark value down there. I know I'm going to lose the claws. I'm seeing if it's worth it for the other aspects of form, which it kind of is. The claws make for a weak silhouette in this case, though, so I'll probably have to make that sacrifice and move this somewhere else, maybe up and into the body, get rid of some of the detail here, start with a nice whiter area again to kind of rough in where something else might go. And I got to think about, okay, well, I'm going to fill this shadow shape back in. Looks like he's shocked or scared because of the pitch of the elbow there. I'd have to get to some pretty big reconstruction for that to work. And you just have to ask yourself, like, well, is it worth it to go all the way back? Because, it's just a sketch and we're just like solving problems and kind of drawing ourselves into a corner and getting out. So maybe it is worth it as far as the drawing goes, especially if it's the underdrawing. If it's the underdrawing, you want to correct as many mistakes as possible if you're going to take this to the next level, which I probably won't, but it's just showing good habits. So let's extend the arm out to here instead. Maybe have him carrying like a giant club or something. Getting a little Dark Soulsy here, which nothing wrong with that. I wish I had the time to play Elden Ring, but I already spent way too much time on triangle strategy, so I got to get back to work. All right, so I know that there's going to be a big shadow under this arm. I know that I'm not going to need all this constructive stuff. And I can then begin to get those claws roughed back in with the big shapes. And I'll figure out maybe he does have like a giant claymore or something, because that's kind of a cooler shape and makes him seem more kingly if he has like a weapon or something. So I'm just sketching all this stuff in super loosely because I'm more interested in the overall shapes than I am in trying to make everything detailed and perfect at this point. I just want everything to look, more cohesive. Imagine a sloth with like super long arms, but he also has like a super long sword. You just gotta hope he's really slow, because if you were fighting this dude, that reach is gonna be really kind of scary. So yeah, obviously not a very happy fellow. Don't have a ton of detail for this, but I think that we're approaching a decent stopping point once I can carve out these shapes a little bit better, because I know that the upper leg there was looking a little small. Probably don't need as much of this arm in the light. Just sort of fill it in with black there, but I will have to move it away from the shadow silhouette just so that we have a little bit better separation of our shapes there. There's so much thinking in shape whenever you're working more solidly in black and white, so something to keep in mind. And I think that's probably going to be a pretty good wrap as far as this demo goes. Basically, just to repeat myself for the nth time, because this grew a little longer than I wanted it to, a prompt, say like the King of Beasts, is here to help me generate an idea. And that idea is really what helps me continue to practice, continue to grow, continue to move in comfortable margins outside of my comfort zone, which is sort of oxymoronic. It just means that you're taking the proper steps out of your comfort zone, not like jumping into the deep end where you're going to drown, but moving into areas where it's more, it's a little uncomfortable, just enough to stir some growth, you know, like giving a plant a stronger stem because it has to deal with the wind. But if there's a tornado, it's going to rip the thing out of the ground and it's dead and there's no point. So you want to find that happy medium. So now we have this really rough sketch of a kingly sloth with some sort of claymore and in sort of a dynamic kind of posture. Kind of sad we lost the cape, but I can always kind of bring it back. Add some fuzz to the end of it. Kind of messes up the silhouette. It's not very easy to reintegrate. Just like getting pickier and pickier about the drawing because I want it to look good, I want it to be framed well. He was kind of lopsided for his general balance. And it's like once you get going, then it seems like less effort on the surface. You know, that activation energy is already spent, so you might as well use it on the thing you're working on. I think this is now at a point where I'd probably be able to go over it with a little more certitude, which again I'm not going to necessarily do, but I wanted to kind of finish up as far as some of these things are concerned, closing off these areas in ways that feels more complete for a sketch. And you know, it's super rough, but it also conveys the idea enough. Like he's the king of beasts. He's got a nice beastly sword. Although I would like to see like some grass silhouettes popping out of this shadow here, just to give you a little more context of where he's at, what he's king of. Bring it all the way across the page so that it's not just like an awkward spot there. Maybe draw some grass in the light too, or like some grassy shapes. Maybe even a longer, I don't know, cattail or two, just because it's going to keep you within the frame. And this is probably a little too dark. Just carving the general shape out some more. And obviously that hand is completely messed. But I'm losing a lot of negative space in here too, which could be helpful to help define things more. So no tan is great for thinking in these types of ways where you're always trying to evolve the shape as opposed to evolve the lines. So obviously the lines are pretty sloppy here, but the shapes are solid. The silhouette works a little more so, and that makes it, you know, it makes it a more workable drawing. The arm's a little too short, not far out enough, which means we have to change the angle of the claymore, which is fine. Just gonna have to probably get rid of it so I can have it on a separate layer. It's hard not to get let out of the canvas with it. Just trying different shape configurations. Might have to nix it just because it kind of leads the eye too far away. So the arm has to be motivated some other way. Can always just keep it under the cape. It's a little more kingly. I have to thin this line or shape out if I'm going all the way to the back here. I'm going to lose a lot of negative space if I fill this in, but I'll also create more negative space, and so I'm just balancing these different shapes as I configure the overall silhouette here. Got a couple different lines for definition. Maybe he's missing an arm. I mean, there's so much to change and so much to like try and configure at this point. So it's okay to be experimental. Where you don't want to be more experimental is on the second or third iteration of your drawings. That's a lot harder to fix when you've really put some time into the lines and the shapes, and you don't want to change them because you've been more accurate. You're being very precious about it. All right, that's looking much better. There's a little too much shadow right here, but it helps with the overlap of like his shoulder and his face. So just going to carve that shadow shape out a bit. This line is more of a constructive one, more of a working line than a line I'd keep in this sketch. But you can also experiment, see if there's any interesting textures to add to the cape. Not really digging it. But that is a much more appropriate silhouette. There's a little bit of oddity going on right there. Yeah, as you can tell, this is not my most comfortable mode of working in just sheer black and white, but it's really important to practice this sometimes because it trains you in, like I said, so many ways: shape, composition, proportion. It's just another way of parsing your work and another way of generating a different aesthetic, if you will. So there's my, oh yeah, I like that little face. It's just like a bunch of little dark shapes. There's a bunch of dark shadow shapes. Oh man, I sounded so Midwestern when I said that. All right, getting a little conscientious here, folks, and it ran longer than I wanted. So sorry for rambling. This is my morning warm-up. I'm just trying to sit here with my cup of coffee and clarify how a prompt can really help you take your work to a different tier or scale or motivate more drawing, because activation energy sometimes is the hardest thing to get over, especially when you have no ideas. And it's difficult to even put anything down because you feel like you're just too aimless. You don't have a destination in mind. But if you have a destination such as King of Beasts, you know that you can work your way toward at least an interesting drawing with an idea, and using what fundamentals you know or are practicing to give that idea some form and actualization. So thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about all the rando fundamentals that I mentioned during this, you can check out thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com for all my courses. You can pre-order the second drawing course, which is going to have every fundamental that I can think of and that I am comfortable, or way more than comfortable, teaching, just to help you strengthen and level up your craft. So I'll see you in the next video. Take care and happy drawing.